Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Sam. And yeah, maybe just to start off, would you like to introduce yourself, introduce your background as industrial designer, and maybe the key experiences that led you up to where you are today?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for having me on. I've listened to a couple of the podcasts, had a couple of friends turn up on your podcast as well, so that's been pretty interesting
Yeah.
to listen to. So my name is Sam Payne. I am an industrial designer, primarily focused on transportation design. So kind of what got me into the industry. Um, I finished school, and in the UK, you kind of have a system of either going into what we call sixth form, which is where you kind of stay at school and do multiple subjects, or you can go out to colleges and do, I guess, more specialized subjects. And I went down the sixth form route, or I thought I wanted to go down the sixth form route, mainly because I had a lot of friends at the particular school that I was looking to go to. And when I got there, they kind of gave me this choice of doing subjects. I was always interested in design, and I thought, okay, well, I want to do D&T.
Mm.
And I got the choice of doing that as well as art. And then you kind of get told the other subjects that you get to choose because that's just how it fits in with the schedule that they have. So there was something along the lines of, I think there was science and maths or something along those lines. And I'd previously gone to a college to look there, and they were doing something really specialized, what they were calling 3D design.
Mm.
And on the day that I was supposed to join the sixth form, I turned around to my mom at that point and said, I don't really want to do this. I want to go to college.
Mm.
And from that point on, that was really the starting point, where I got into the design industry and started learning about the different, facets that make up really what you do as a designer. And when I was there, we were doing all these sorts of things like architecture, jewelry design, furniture design, all that sort of stuff, products. And my tutor at the time turned around and said, "Guys, there's a degree show on at Coventry University for the automotive design
Mm.
school." And we thought, oh yeah, that sounds pretty cool. And my mind was just totally blown. You get in there and you start thinking, wow, there's people who are like actually designing cars for a
Mm.
living. This is something you can do. I had no idea about this.
Mm.
You know, when I was at that stage of my sort of experience, and that was it for me. I just thought I have to go to this university. So I went on and applied for the automotive and transport course. I like cars, but transport as a whole system is kind of where my interest
Mm.
lies. And then during that time at Coventry, that was where I met my future boss, or my first boss outside of university. He was joining us as like a visiting lecturer, just helping out.
Mm.
And that's that was really kind of the roots of where my professional career started. So when I finished at Coventry, I sort of thought, well, I don't necessarily just want to specialize in cars. It's certainly something that everyone loves to do, but I think there's more broader forms of transport to explore. And
Mm.
I've had a bit more of an interest in like sustainable transport solutions as well. So kind of led me away from the car design side of it.
Mm.
And ironically, my first job was as industrial designer at a company called JCB Excavators. So they sell construction machinery, problem solving, manufacturing, liaising with various disciplines within the business, marketing, stakeholders, chairmen, all that sort of stuff. And that's where I kind of founded probably what I would say a lot of my core skills.
Mm.
And inevitably, after a few years, I started thinking, okay, am I going to have to wait for retirement to go and see the world? And I had my girlfriend at the time who I was with. We kind of had a bit of a chat and decided that we want to pack up shop and come and have a look at the world. And we chose Australia as our kind of go-to place, and basically just lived as backpackers for a year, which
Mm.
was quite an interesting change of pace. You have to be,
Mm.
it's very, very different. I'm very, uh, I like to be quite organized, so that was kind of useful for the travels. And when we started off in Hobart and then we ended up in Cairns, that was kind of like the whole trip.
Mm.
And the original plan was to, like all, most backpackers, was to do some farm work. And I kind of thought, uh, I'm going to pass. I've heard way too many terrible stories about, not being paid and having to work 9 months and all that sort of stuff. So I thought, all right, I'll fire out a couple of emails to people in Sydney, companies in Sydney, and we just booked some plane tickets. And fortunately, the day that we were due to come into Sydney, I got an email back from a transportation consultancy called IDA. They said, "Oh, yeah, come in and have a chat." And I went in, had a chat, and funnily enough, they had someone else who was a backpacker working for them who was basically leaving the day that I arrived. So there was a job on
Yeah.
offer that I did that for 6 months. So we were working across quite a range of products. So anything from medical, consumer products to transport. So a lot of work in the rolling stock industry. And at that point, my employer now, he was a client and just took a bit of a shine to me. And when I inevitably, you have conversations about sponsorship and so on and so forth, and that's always, yeah, it's quite a complex process to
Mm.
go down. So nothing really came to fruition, and we went back to the UK, and I started looking around for another job. I went back to JTB to see, what was going on there. There was I went to an interview with a company called David Gordon Design. They were mainly doing trains again. And then I went for an interview at a company called Design Q. So they were doing a lot of like business jets, aviation, cars, and all that sort of stuff, aircraft seats. And I had a few, an offer from each one, and inevitably, because I have a preference to try and, try myself at as many industries as I can.
Mm.
I ended up going with Design Q, and that was turned out to be a great choice. I arrived at the job the first day, and I was working on a VTOL project for Airbus, and I thought, okay, well, this is pretty cool.
Mm.
And then within a few weeks, I got an email from my now employer to say, "Oh, I want you to come back to Sydney. I'm setting up a internal design team." And that took about a year to, come to fruition once you get through all the paperwork. And I've been here for now probably about 6 years.
Mm.
Yeah, so it's
Oh, great.
been
You've
been
been
a
on such a
while.
journey across countries, back and forward. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm keen on moving another time across the world. It's quite a trek, but it's yeah. I didn't think my career would ever allow me to do that, so that's
Mm.
definitely a bonus.
That's the flexibility about design, I suppose, is you can kind of work cross countries as like you don't even really need the language sometimes. As long as you've got that kind of design language, you can really you're quite flexible where you can work. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the pandemic actually enabled design a lot
Mm.
more remotely. Like we spent 2 years working from our own homes across projects in China, America, and Europe,
Mm.
and as we didn't really run into any hitches. It was just more the fact that you couldn't visit the client personally, which is, something I still highly value that, but
Mm.
there's also a level of efficiency to it as well now.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, Australia in some ways has been limited in the past from being so far away geographically from the rest of the world. But I mean, with the way the world is moving now, I feel like it's becoming less and less of a limitation. We can kind of work internationally in that way. As you said, it's never the same, but yeah, it kind of opens up that possibility a lot more than before. Mm.
Yeah, I was actually quite surprised about Australian design, to be honest,
Mm.
because I really knew nothing about the design industry within Australia. I just knew that Ford had a studio down in Melbourne, and quite, a few of my friends from university ended up there. And
Mm.
it's quite. I think Australia is quite an underrated powerhouse of design. Once you get here and start to understand what people are doing and what they have
Mm,
done, is it's on the same level or above quite a lot of the world, and
mm,
that came. It didn't come as a shock, but it came as quite a pleasant surprise once I really sort of found my feet.
mm. Yeah, I suppose it comes down to probably the flexibility of Australian designers as well, because we're that smaller market, you kind of have to be able to be a bit of a jack of all trades, like yourself, who've worked in a few different organizations and can kind of take on roles as they need to.
And I think it's quite evident in some of the products that are being developed inside Australia, especially for markets like the US,
Mm,
China, for example, even really to market into Australia as well. So I think the flexibility of Australian design is really what the enabler is there.
mm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, you've moved on a few different fields, from automotive design to somewhat classic industrial design. And I mean, I feel like with automotive designers, a lot of people say they're an automotive designer, but they mainly focus on cars, whereas you've really had that
Yeah.
flexibility. What challenges do you think, like from my perspective, it seems almost like a unachievable task going from designing a train to designing a plane to designing a car. What is the challenges of kind of flipping between different modes of transport? Is there common design challenges, or is it quite different from mode to mode?
Um, so in terms of transport, I mean, you kind of tend to look at it as like a collective. So they call it mass, like mobility
Mm,
as a service. And that's one of the key things. So, like, for example, when we're talking about rolling stock design and you start talking about the passenger experience and you start honing down into that technical aspect of, how are we going to design this train? But
mm,
if you take a passenger experience approach to it and
mm,
how it integrates into, for example, the city or a wider network, the passenger experience essentially starts at the door. The
mm,
minute you leave the door, even before when you're interacting with the app that you might be booking your train ticket
mm,
on, for example. So, people might take their electric scooter down to the train station, they'll take the train to the airport, they'll take a flight from Sydney to Melbourne, for example. That's so I think the reality is you have to kind of step back and take a broader look at it.
mm,
Comes down to designing specific modes of transport. There's always quite prescriptive standards and methodologies that tend to be followed. So,
mm,
tenders, bids, and gate processes in terms of the development. So there's not really much difficulty in terms of transferring development skills, like how a mobility system is developed. The
mm,
difficulty is in terms of learning the nuances of those specific systems. So
mm,
the expectations on a aircraft are totally different to the expectations on a train, and some are more conservative, some are more sort of adventurous industries, and I just kind of had to riff it until I really got that understanding. And
mm,
I've just in my instance, I've been pretty lucky to just be surrounded by the right people. That's
mm,
that's really all it's been. But I think if designers can take that system approach rather than just a specific individual item, then they're going to be able to apply those skills, quite widely. We're starting to, I'm starting to see like quite a cross pollination of skills and ideas between areas like automotive. You're seeing automotive design becoming more autonomous,
mm,
more bus-like applications. Buses are becoming more, well, some of them are, they're talking about light rail vehicles, trackless trams, all those sorts of things. And you're starting to see that crossover,
mm,
coming there. And I think everyone from each industry has value to put into other sectors. And I think
mm,
that's really what it's going to be about. It's going to be about collaborative approaches,
mm.
to those transportation modalities.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where the world goes. Like the narrative of what is seen as a classic vehicle might completely change in the coming years. As we move away from the experience of driving a car to the experience of the car driving itself, what is the passenger going to do? And like, how is that going to change the whole experience and the whole dynamic? It's an
Yeah,
interesting time. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I think I don't know personally how sold I am on autonomous car ownership. It sort of, to me, defeats the point a little.
Mm,
I'm either taking the journey, like I either don't want to own the car and not have the expense, but I want private ride from A to
mm,
B, or I want to be able to just walk down to the station and get on the train and not have to worry about anything.
mm,
There's a, for me personally, it's a bit of a grey area at the moment in terms of
mm.
what these autonomous cars are trying to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's going to be a really hard time going forward as well. As like, I mean, in Australia, we have a massive industry of people who are just passionate about cars and want to drive their car on the weekends. And, I mean, I'm a motorbike rider myself, but it's the
Yeah,
same kind of deal. It's going to be hard to convince people that they're not going to be able to drive their vehicle normally anymore. They have to let the vehicle drive itself because from a safety aspect, having non-autonomous drivers on the road is a safety risk. But at the same time, not having any control of the car is, it takes away all the enjoyment out of driving. So it's
yeah,
hard to level
exactly.
that. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I don't own a car here because public transport for me is pretty accessible. And
Mm.
we went back to the UK recently, and I got back into my old manual Golf that's been souped up a little bit, and I was just right, back when I was 18, just
Mm.
really enjoying that hands-on driving experience. So for me, that's kind of where the good experiences lie.
Mm.
If it goes to autonomous, I don't know exactly how I feel about it just yet,
Mm.
but definitely, I think there's opportunities there, and I think
Mm.
this is why we're seeing a shift in how a lot of the automotive OEMs are starting to,
Mm.
start to think a little bit broader in terms of capacity, car sharing, and all that sort of stuff.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I drove through Sydney a week ago, and I can say that I would not want to be doing it again. So I feel like definitely in a city, it makes a lot of sense to have autonomous vehicles or at least really good public transport.
Yeah, I mean, people are stressed enough, aren't they? If you
Yeah.
ever get to the center of Sydney, it's just it's too much of a high stress environment to want
Yeah.
to add another layer on top of that, really. So
Mm.
that's really where I would stand on it. I just want the easy life
Mm.
to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting space being in. And do you think you like have you explored other areas of industrial design in your past, and have you found your passion for this field, or would you be interested in moving into something else like that in the future?
No, I've always been. I mean, this is kind of why I've stayed with where I am at the moment. Is
Mm.
like whilst we are primarily a transportation consultancy, we've done a lot of work in various areas. Uh, our managing director is pretty open to ideas and not someone who will say no, you can't do that. We just do trains and that's our bread and butter.
Mm.
We've done projects along the lines of furniture, for example. We've done consumer products. We're doing a range of bike parts at the moment. On the face value, really, what we market ourselves at is basically mobility.
Mm.
So I'm quite lucky that I do get to do all aspects in
Mm.
house.
Mm.
Basically, it's always a case of as long as we're leveraging our internal expertise, then whatever sector that applies to, we're quite happy to explore. So
Mm.
I even the other day, I was happily just sketching away at furniture design, and I enjoy it. You get that transferable skill from designing like passenger, a passenger seat for an airplane through to a piece of furniture that someone might have in their house.
Mm.
Form changes, but the sort of core principles of comfort, look, ergonomics, sustainability, how is it made, what materials are we using, they're completely transferable.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. You mentioned sustainability. How does sustainability play a role in the organization you're currently working in?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting because if we talk about the client side of it for a
Mm.
second, the rolling stock industry has kind of been on a pedestal where they've always been known as one of the most sustainable modes of transport in
Mm.
terms of how many people you can transfer
Mm.
per carbon part. So the one of the issues I do see in the industry is mainly there's a tendency to stay as it is, and there's everything is like steel structure, has to last X amount of years, and the standards that go along with that don't tend to develop for new materials. So when you start talking about things like fire performance and all that sort of stuff, then you do tend to get limited to materials that aren't necessarily as sustainable as they need to be. So from that side of things, we're pushing quite hard to help redefine those standards, to work with suppliers to find materials that do meet that compliance as well, so that we can use something that is, you know, a lot more sustainable. Really, where, like, from the industrial design side of things, that's where we sort of sit. You know, we have that responsibility to inject sustainability at every part of the design process, because more often than not, you know, these trains are on the track for 30 or 40 years, and potential to the decision that you make at this point in the development process is still going to affect people in a either positive or negative way 30 or 40 years in the future. And that's kind of what you've got to think about. From the engineering aspects, we're quite heavy into composites, so in terms of lightweight engineering. So that's something that we've been quite heavily involved in on a few projects that have gone into service, particularly in China, whereby we're reducing the structural weight of the vehicle by up to 30 or 40%, which is, when you start talking about wear and tear, energy needed to move people, passenger capacity and axle loads, then the composites do offer real long-term benefits. The issues that you tend to run into with transportation, especially mass transportation, is basically price. And as a lot of these projects are kind of influenced by which government is in at which time, then the fund, you know, that there doesn't seem to be too much of a thought process of long-term cost benefit versus short-term upfront, you know, costs. And that's kind of where it's a bit interesting in trying to convince people that things need to be lighter, they need to be engineered better. You need to look at additive manufacturing, for example, in terms of printing parts on demand, shorten the supply chain, all that sort of stuff that kind of helps reduce your carbon footprint on the project.
Yeah, I suppose it's hard to balance as well, because a lot of the time trains in Australia or anywhere will be adopted for, you know, 20, 30, like, even I've seen trains on the road that look like, on the tracks that look like they're from the 1970s or older, where I'm from in Brisbane. And like, when you're building something that's going to be in function for that long, sometimes, you know, using less sustainable materials that are going to be better for durability is sometimes a balance that's worth making. Because, you know, like, you could choose a sustainable option, but will it last, you know, that much time? That's the struggle, and we don't know sometimes as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one as well, like, because realistically with these composites, they kind of eliminate we're going a bit engineering here, but they tend to eliminate fatigue cracking. So in theory, they could last forever. They're repairable. Whereas with the steel structures, there tend to be, you know, a cycle of repair and maintenance, which is not only costly, but does that really need to happen? So that's why we're particularly interested in exploring new materials, and what we're lobbying for at the moment is an update to basically the standards and the procurement processes to enable people to innovate in what I would probably call a reasonably conservative industry.
What type of composite materials do you use? Like, are they derived from natural material or something?
No, so on
Like
the
carbon
structural
fiber?
side of it, yeah, it's carbon fiber, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, even carbon fiber, like, it's a hard one, because it's so bad for the environment if damaged and like sanded or anything like that, or even just producing it's really bad for the environment. But then, like, longevity, it lasts for a really long time and it's super strong. This is the thing with sustainability, is like, it's always a balance, and it's always hard to say something is 100% sustainable, or like, this is the best decision for sustainability, as it's hard to weigh it all up.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, this is like what we're sort of doing at the moment is we're looking into a few partnerships with other design consultancies. So I've got some colleagues in the UK that we're looking to work with particularly pertaining to sustainability in aviation and rolling stock. And what they bring to the table is more sustainability on the, the materials side of it. So interior plastics, fabrics, and all that side of it. What we put on the table is really the optimization of structural design and composites. So, composites have been around in the aviation industry for a very long time, and the rolling stock industry, I'd say, is due to catch up, hopefully at some point. But there's a reason for all of it, and if it means that there's less traction wear or less energy needed, less infrastructure needed, that's a benefit, potentially benefit, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, in your current role, you're moving on from the traditional role as an industrial designer into a more management level as a designer. How did you find that move, and how has that really changed the way you look at design as a whole?
Actually, I'll be honest with you, I found it quite difficult because I was basically the first industrial design employee in the company. So there wasn't really, in terms of design management, there wasn't much guidance. I've kind of like I landed in Sydney, and then within I think a week I was off to China to meet our colleagues on a project for a high-speed train. And you sort of land and you go, oh my God, like what the hell have I done? I have no idea what I'm doing. And it's kind of just trial. For me, it's been trial by fire. But then also, I guess, a lot of self-reflection and not self-criticism, but just looking for areas where, okay, is that a really efficient way of doing it? Is that not? But as I've kind of grown into the role, I've become more interested in the business of design. The design process is something in and of itself, but behind that, there's always a business that needs to make money and feed its employees and keep its clients happy. And that's how people like yourself and I keep our jobs. And I think there was just to reference another podcast, there was an interview with Gerald Kisker, and I think it was Crown and Filters. And the way he talks about the business of design really resounded with me. And that's where I sort of thought, okay, there's a different way of thinking about this rather than just sitting there and doing the design work. I'm quite lucky that I do get to do both. We're a pretty small team, so it's not like I'm managing 50 people and that's all I do is Excel spreadsheets and presentations. So I still do get to be involved in a lot of the day-to-day design work, pen to paper, CAD, visualization. So that's what keeps me here and keeps me happy.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, the design process, I feel like you can apply it to a lot of different roles. You could definitely apply it to even a management sense. Using that process within the organization and organizing all the clients and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I feel like you're probably using your skills in that way anyway. It's just a different application.
Yeah, it's it's like they call like design as a service, really. It's not just analyzing the products that maybe a company might have. It's okay, well, how does design work within your company? How is it communicated? What sort of assets do you need to enable that, or to enable people to think a little bit more creatively? I think it's always been shown that design-led businesses often do very, very well.
Yeah, definitely. How do you foster that, that teamwork approach within the organization, foster collaboration and things like that would benefit the overall success?
I would actually say the leader of that is our boss. He's instilled that from day one. We're a very small team. There's only 4 of us in the office at the moment, and that's engineering, design, and additive manufacturing. And we're always looking for a way to bring that all together. Some projects might just be pure engineering, some are just pure design. You do get the odd project coming where everything is needed. So, and just asking questions, like I probably constantly annoy my engineering colleagues and by asking them, really stupid questions about, how can I do this? What if I do it this way? Could I print this way? Would this work? And try and, sometimes trying to offer my input on an engineering issue and just from a different perspective. And that's kind of that's when the sort of guard goes down and egos are lost, and you kind of just know that you're all working collectively to just better each other.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's really important to foster those relationships as well. Even in my current role now, I work with a lot of people in the manufacturing floor and just like building
Yeah.
up that relationship. So when something goes wrong or when you just don't know something about their processes, you can just ask them and keep that relationship building. It's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just about being curious, really.
Mm,
It's, it, no one knows everything, and there's always value to someone else's opinion or expertise. And there might be, little snippet within whatever they say to you that, really changes the way you think, or
mm,
you go, okay, I know I can use that to add value somewhere else. And it's just really about being open-minded. I think that's really, that's to me, that's kind of like actually a core skill of our industry,
mm,
to be open-minded and don't always assume that we know everything,
mm,
and to ask questions constantly, because we need to, challenge the norms or gain understanding, in other areas that we may not, have that sort of expertise.
mm. Yeah, definitely. How have you kind of focused your personal detail orientated approach to design? Like is being detail orientated something important that you see as important in your role, or is it something that you believe that all designers don't necessarily need to have?
I think detail orientation is certainly important. I think it depends on where in the sort of development process you might be used. If you're working in like a really large consultancy and you're doing sort of like initial concept design, you definitely have to have an understanding of the details to maybe enable your colleagues further down the line to, bring this product to fruition.
Mm,
I think the detail side of it came from the work that I did at JCB, because
mm,
we were like, when I joined, there was this massive overhaul of the products for what they were calling, I think it was tier, if I remember, tier 4 interim. So it was like an emissions regulation, and everything had to be redesigned. You're talking hundreds of products. So that was the big opportunity to redo the brand in terms of the physical language of the brand. But also, we had to get directly involved pretty quickly with manufacturing and engineering. It was
mm,
absolutely necessary to do that. So you inevitably end up in those details discussions almost straight away. Even though I was still learning, I had a basic knowledge of Alias at that point, and
mm,
all that sort of thing. But it was really led by influenced by my boss at that point. And there was 4 of us who joined JCB all at the same time for Coventry, and you were just assigned a product range to develop, and you just live and breathe that till it's all signed off. It's gone
mm,
through the gate process. The prototypes are up in the quarry, and they're putting the hours in to basically test it. So I think that was just ingrained in a really early part of my career,
mm,
um, which maybe that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's still important to sometimes just step away and create loose ideas.
mm,
That's otherwise you kind of get a little bit, everything, especially if you're doing stuff for yourself, it becomes a little bit um, too overdone, or too much effort goes into it, rather than, okay, maybe I can have a little bit more value doing a couple of various things a bit more loosely. So I think it's really just down to the individual to decide as and when the detail is really needed,
mm.
and at what point.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've noticed that in my role already. Sometimes when the brief is so well defined, you don't have the flexibility to kind of, you know, experiment and make something a bit different, make something maybe that wasn't necessarily thought of. So in that way, like having a very detailed brief opposed to having something a little bit more loose can be beneficial in that way as well, not even just from the designer side. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I mean, when you get like a really prescriptive brief, I mean,
Mm,
that is essentially what we're trying to do at that point, is creative problem solving.
mm,
It's we have to look at the project through a different lens sometimes, to say, okay, well, if we maybe take this approach, that is within the brief, but it's not necessarily within what you might call like a standard
mm,
expectation of how we've always done things. And that's probably sometimes where you can sort of say, well, I think I can add some market value to this product. I think I can
mm.
add maybe we can consider this material instead because we can then add a greater degree of sustainability. We can drive costs down. So I think there's always room for a bit of creativity, but I think if you're sort of taking just a really loose pen sketch and trying to turn that into a final product, you inevitably have to add some sort of prescriptive restrictions to it with manufacturing processes, or even client needs as well.
Yeah, definitely. What are the various challenges you've experienced as an industrial designer within the field? Maybe even talking to the challenges of being industrial design in Australia versus overseas.
Okay, so in Australia, I think that like you pointed out earlier, the market is pretty small. So we have found difficulty sometimes in terms of like engagement with maybe Europe and those sort of areas, particularly. I found that particularly on larger scale projects where we could still add value, but we just happen to be on a different time zone. But I think one of the difficulties that I've seen, and I feel like it is changing a bit, is just expressing the value of design. And I know that's kind of come up on your podcast before when, like, for example, when you spoke to Nathan at Catapult. But I think that is an industry-wide thing that really we're all pushing for, is that education of the value of design, not only for the brand, but also for business. And that's partly where that interest in the business of design is. You can sell the product on the way it looks and functions, but if you can also add that that understanding of the commercial value of the investment, then that's where you're going to get onto a winner. It's just a case of educating people who may not have looked at their products or their brand through the lens of a designer before. That's the sort of job that we've got to do, and the sort of difficulties that we've got ahead of us.
Yeah, I'm lucky. My current role, I'm working for a design-led organization. The operations manager is actually an ex-industrial designer. So he's like, there's no need to win that battle. Like, it's kind of acknowledged in the business that design is very important, and it's kind of an integral part of the way the business operates. But yeah, I could definitely see. I feel like there's definitely more businesses that are realizing the value, and especially like manufacturing businesses, they're kind of seeing the value of having an in-house team or having a very much underpinned design in the business. But I suppose the battle's still to be won.
I think even like you're starting to get a lot of the sales and marketing teams coming over to that side of it. So for example, they understand the sort of psychology of design and presentation. That's like core of what we're doing. We're trying to convince people to buy into our ideas and our products. And we're finding more and more we're getting requests for example, configurators. Using like Unreal Engine to develop configurators or immersive VR experiences, and we start to use those sort of what would they call them, tools. The process, but also after the process. And it's okay, we've developed your design, we've nurtured it all the way through. Now let's kind of do that big push to get it out the door and get it marketable. I think a lot of agencies now are offering that as really a service. It's the building of the assets to really enable a market impact on the products that they develop with their clients.
Yeah, you mentioned VR. VR is probably the most applicable to your industry, the way I see it anyway. I did my final assignment at uni was designing a motorbike, and well, I did other stuff as well, but that was like part of the design. And I found just sitting in VR over the motorbike so amazing, like being able to really experience how it looks to scale. And I can just imagine designing a train would be the same, like being inside the train, seeing how the user would interact with the seats. Has the business had experience with those kind of processes?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do use VR a lot. We tend to use it at maybe strategic points within a project, because there's often quite a lot of work to get stuff into the headset, get it optimized. So it'll either be early on where we might do quite a low fidelity design review, so you're not really looking at the materials and the finishes and getting all the bump maps to work perfectly. But we're looking at maybe the overall train layout and, taking someone through that journey from front to back. But we also use it a lot in development of areas like the driver's cabs, for example. These guys have quite a big input on and say in terms of the space that they operate in. And instead of spending, tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars building high fidelity mock-ups, it's really about, right, let's get a wooden buck in place. Let's get these guys in and get them to see how, see what they feel about the layout and the sight lines and all that sort of stuff. That's where it definitely adds value early on. And then when you start to get to the sales and marketing side of it, we do find there's more there's a shift towards more like refined animations or quite highly refined virtual reality experiences. It's quite interesting though, because we're now, like, with this recent integration of like Google API into Unreal, you can basically import any part of the world into Unreal and just draw up your train track and bang the trains in situ. And it's pretty awesome technology that we're exploring at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely interesting to see where VR goes. I think as far as industrial design from a small product standpoint, it might be limited long term. But from designing a train application, like I just think I don't see any place where it could be more applicable. And to really feel like you're immersed in that. And I was also thinking, it's interesting how you mentioned that you brought the drivers of the train into and be immersed in it. I feel like that's a perfect way to understand the needs of the user. And I mean, it's interesting that the organization took that approach in design.
Well, I think there's a little bit of sort of psychology as well to it, because these guys want to be engaged early on. And if you bring them in an early stage of the process, then it's a lot easier to all work together rather than having that standoff where the design's sort of semi-finalized. Okay, now we need the input, which is kind of what I've seen before. And like, a good example would be probably at JCB, where there was a lot of product and engineering development, and then you get all the test drivers in later on, and they're like, no, throw it out, it's all crap, we're not using this doesn't work, this isn't how we use it. Whereas from an engineering and design standpoint, they were thinking, okay, this is where this logically fits, this is where this logically goes. And the big shift that I noticed at JCB was when we brought in-house ergonomists who were engaging with them really, really early on to understand exactly, what are the functions, where does this need to be? You start building those low fidelity mock-ups, with magnets and stuff for them to move things around. And the end result is always a better product. Engaging with people early on through whatever means necessary, whether it is mock-ups or VR, is just, to me, critically important. You wouldn't develop a consumer product without talking to the market beforehand. And for these larger transportation projects, you've got to get everyone involved early.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was watching this video the other day about trains. Actually, it's quite interesting about the design of trains early on, and they were talking about how trains were originally designed to look fast, before they were designed to be aerodynamic, which is quite interesting. So they didn't know that having an aggressive, pointy looking train was actually better for aerodynamics, and they kind of just made it look like that because they thought it looked faster. And then it kind of bled onto that. In the same way, how do you balance aesthetics of a train, or aesthetics of anything, with the functionality and the intention of the design?
Yeah, a lot of it just depends on where it's operating and what this maybe cultural expectations are. So one of the biggest projects we did for China was the Winter Olympic train, which wasn't just supposed to be sort of like the pinnacle of their high-speed network, but they originally, I think we started with a 9-meter front end, and you have quite a specific aerodynamic coefficiency that you kind of want to hit. And a lot of people were doing various designs, and the aerodynamic coefficiency wasn't coming back so good. And then someone further on goes, oh, it'd look good if it has 11 meters on the front end, which totally changes a lot of the requirements that we have to work around, the crash area, driver sight lines and all that sort of stuff. But the design that we did was pretty adaptable to that change, and it was just a case of keep it simple, keep it logical, and that's where we utilized our engineering team, because we just have the aerodynamic software be able to do that. So we just kind of eliminated a lot of the guesswork up front, and then we knew what we could achieve pretty quickly.
Do you guys generally work on Australian trains, or do you work mostly on international projects? Because I mean, in Australia, especially where some of the places I've been, the trains seem to be quite limited. It doesn't seem like we've got much money being pumped into Australian train infrastructure. So I'd be quite interested to see who the main customers are. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's definitely a lot of infrastructure that needs to be there, and there's quite a few projects going on. There's the suburban loop in Melbourne. There's the Western Sydney Airport at the moment.
Yep.
There's one up in Brisbane as well that's happening at the moment. So the investment is there. If you compare it to like China, for example, who are designing, they've built this whole high-speed train network within 10 to 15 years, then yeah, the development process is a bit slower in Australia. We do work in Australia. We work with a lot of the OEM manufacturers, but we also work a lot with like the local authorities and the people who are actually providing the network and the services. But I would say probably predominantly most of our work has been overseas.
Yep. Yeah. Oh yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I'm from Brisbane, and yeah, they're building the new Interrail train. What is it called? Can't remember. It has a name anyway. And
it's QM something. I can't
something like
remember.
that, yeah. And it'll be interesting to see if it makes a difference. I don't know. We still only have overground trains, so surely it's going to make some difference. But yeah, it'd be interesting. How do you see the space of train design and automotive design in general evolving in the coming years? We've already mentioned autonomy. Any other changes you see as being really integral to the future?
I think what I'm definitely seeing in terms of the rolling stock industry is multimodal spaces. So people are kind of trying to use their time a bit differently on the trains, and that's really what I expect will, like in some cases, after COVID, a lot of the operators are starting to find that actually the patronage is down. And that's because people have realized, okay, well, maybe I don't need to be in the office. Maybe I'm not as productive on the train as I want to be. And I'm definitely seeing a lot of development in terms of these, modular passenger spaces or multifunctional spaces, particularly on like the longer journeys as well. That seems to be a very key theme. And for the operator, that ability to sort of refit a train for specific purposes quickly is something that I'm seeing a lot of. Yeah, that's I think that's one of the key things. It's going to be that multifunctional asset that a lot of them want to develop.
Yeah, definitely. As far as your career, you've obviously worked across many countries in different spaces. What are any key lessons that you feel like you've picked up along the way that would have really benefited you early on in your career?
Oh, no, that's a good question. Key lessons. I think probably maybe not a key lesson, but one of the key realizations that I had is just to kind of let go of my ego. I think that was the biggest change for me. And I think I found coming out of university, I've got my first job, doing all this stuff, and then there was this sort of ego that creeps in and thinking that you know everything, and that's the biggest change and the biggest benefit to enable me to talk to the right people and learn from them and grow is really just letting go of that. I think that's something that's applicable to not just to your career, but outside of your career is just learning how to just talk to people on the same level and just being like always being a student, not necessarily thinking that you're the master at all points. That was probably the biggest change for me, and just that willingness to engage with people as well. I'm quite happy to talk and hear anyone's idea from any background. It doesn't matter whether they're just someone with this idea that they came up with overnight, or if they're, if it's a multinational corporation that wants to try and achieve a certain goal. It's sort of giving everyone a chance, because everyone has value to add.
Yeah, definitely. Not putting yourself on the pedestal as being a designer and then being, a non-designer. Like, anyone is open to feedback and anyone has valuable feedback. It's a good lesson.
Yeah, and definitely just don't take things personally if it doesn't.
Mm.
It's not necessarily what someone wants, or it doesn't hit the right mark straight away. I think I think a lot of people, like we said earlier, you can get carried away in the details, and then you realize actually this isn't what they wanted. This is kind of what I wanted, and I think that's a key thing, is just not to take it personally and don't get disheartened when things don't necessarily go the way you want, because it's always an opportunity in the future to either learn from what has happened, or try and understand how you can engage, with that person or that process or that opportunity in a different way.
Yeah, I found that even so far in my career, being not learning to take feedback well and not be self-critical of yourself. I think designers and creatives in general, we're probably some of the most self-critical people out there.
Yeah.
But like learning to distance yourself from that and just take criticism or feedback as just a learning experience to build yourself up. It's a good way to look at
Yeah.
it.
I think, look, what I'm seeing from a lot of like your generation of designers, which I think is really great, is just that confidence to engage with the industry. And like when I was sort of back at university, you kind of put them all on a pedestal, and they were, these big, bad, scary people who were, too good to talk to you. And that's not always really what it's about. And I think, when you get people like yourself who are talking to a wide variety of, designers and architects and whatever, who are wanting to understand, the variety of the industry that you work within, I think that's going to enable a lot of people, enable your audience to, think about things that they may not have thought of, or understand things. But also, like for yourself, when you might take something away from a conversation that you have, that you may have never been able to, get that information in the first place, and that willingness to just be open and listen to people and talk to them, taking that step to talk to them, you find most of the time people want to talk. And I think that's a really good thing that a lot of the young designers are doing right now, is just coming to the table for a chat.
Yeah, I mean, initially I was like, I don't want to start a podcast because I'm not a designer yet. I'm in university. Do I have the credibility to start a podcast? But at the same time, just willing to chat to people and talk to them, I feel like it's all you really need. And I'd recommend anyone to start their own podcast, or make some sort of social media or YouTube channel, whatever, because it's very yeah.
Absolutely. It's a community, isn't it? It's all right. Agencies are in some way competitive to each other, but that doesn't mean that designers as individuals or groups are, competitive. It's a community that you can either choose to engage with, or you can choose not to. And I think that's what I'm starting to see is most people want to engage, and I think that's a really good thing. It's not just going to benefit people's personal growth, but it benefits the clients that we end up gaining.
Yeah, well, I mean, from my personal experience, I've found that nearly 100% of people I've spoken to are willing to come on the podcast.
Yeah.
And, even from day one, when I first started off, one of the first people I had on was a pretty famous international designer. And realistically, they had no reason to come on from any sort of promotional reason. I wasn't really offering them anything, but they were just willing to come on because they're passionate about what they do. And like that's the benefit of our field. People aren't that necessarily there for money. A lot of the time they're there because they really enjoy what they do, and then money is just an extra.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's it. There's like, all right, we all need to put food on the table and keep a roof over our heads, but I don't think, if you wanted to just look at money, then you'd probably go into a different industry, right?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe just to finish on some interesting topics. You've developed a lot over your career. Have you taken on many younger designers, graduates and things like that along the way? And like, how would you give advice to people in that position? My colleagues from university, how can they make that first break into their career, and get a role that's going to fulfill them?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, in terms of I guess, fostering younger designers, that is, yeah, I've had quite a bit of experience doing that. We took on a lot of internships at JCB, so that was probably my first opportunity to bring someone onto the team. And during that time, he actually developed quite a unique position for himself in terms of the visualization, and he then stayed on at JCB to do that because he was just really bloody good at it. And he's moved on to Jag Land Rover now, so that's kind of awesome to see. So, and then I had the same thing at Design Q. So when we were there was a couple of there was a intern at that point from Coventry Uni, and he's become a good mate of mine. And now where is he now? I think he's at Aston Martin doing that side of things. So I would like to get that sort of thing happening at Fordyno, definitely. It's something that we haven't done yet, and I really, I kind of get to the point in your career where you're kind of like, well, I kind of want to give something back. I don't want to just sit doing the day-to-day stuff. I want to enable someone else to continue making those advances in our industry. So that's definitely something that I really want to implement in the studio that we're currently in. But I think my advice in terms of young designers would be just don't be afraid to ask for feedback, and just approach people. 90% of the people will be more than willing to look over your portfolio or consider you coming in for an internship or even a job, even if it's not advertised. You've just got to ask and have that confidence to do it. It doesn't come across as arrogance if you're asking. It's really a case of like we went back to the curiosity and that willingness to engage with the industry. And someone might come back and give you all right, it might be a bit of a harsh review on your portfolio, but it gives you something to think about. And that's like I said, that's where you kind of need to not have so much of an ego that you feel like you're in the right all the time. You take on that criticism and adapt in a way that you think would work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I went to a few interviews, and when they don't work out, you can quite often feel disheartened. But what I found was the most beneficial thing was actually just ask, why didn't I get that role? Can I have some feedback on my application, my portfolio, my resume, even my interview? And a lot of that feedback I bled into my future interviews, which I found very helpful. So I would definitely recommend that to anyone who's going to interviews. If you don't get the job, that's not the end of it. Ask them, and usually people are very much willing to give you a bit of feedback.
Yeah, of course. And that's kind of life. Like, you are going to get rejections, and it's just a case of like, how are you going to move it on from there at that point? Maybe that just wasn't meant to be on that day. Maybe it leads to better things. We just don't know, and there's no point being caught up in it and being resentful about maybe not getting the ideal position that you want. And who knows where it will lead. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, that's great. You've mentioned VR. How do you see AI affecting the future of transportation and the future of your role as a design manager?
Yeah, that's it. It's a bit of a hot topic at the moment, really, isn't it? It's I can definitely see value in it, and we've been playing around with it a bit in-house. I'm not totally convinced it's there at the moment, but I think in terms of maybe like idea generation, okay, there's definitely something there. But that, I think designers always having that ability to transform a 2D image into a tangible product that can be manufactured, that meet all the constraints and requirements and production processes, regulatory standards, is still basically a core skill of understanding that might not ever be replaced. I think people should approach AI as like an enabler to make their job more efficient. That's kind of where I sit with it now. I'm quite interested in, for example, with the VR, how AI can actually be implemented into it. And I saw this really good YouTube video a while ago where this guy has developed basically a paper aeroplane, and he's integrated Chat GPT into it, and it's flying over some city, and you type in a different location, and that then talks to Chat GPT, that talks to Google, and then basically moves the paper aeroplane into a new position and gives you a fun fact about the location. That you imagine doing that manually and trying to program all of that is it's not necessarily going to be a good use of someone's time. So I definitely think it will have pretty tangible uses in the future. I think it is good at the moment in terms of enabling people to be a little bit more creative in terms of how they explore initial ideas. And I'm seeing some really good stuff in terms of bringing those 2D images and pulling them into like depth maps and watching people 3D model over the top of them to translate that 2D into 3D purely via AI. And that's super interesting. How it gets implemented in studios at the moment is I think that's still to be found out.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting time to be a designer. I think I even was watching a video the other day about CGI, and this guy was saying how basically his job as a CGI artist, where he would sit in hours and hours cropping an alien into this scene, has been pretty much replaced by this AI that can do it in like an hour, just sitting there doing the calculations. But like then the end of the video, he was talking about how basically this means now that he could make a whole movie in like the span of a few weeks instead of a few years. And I think that's a good way to look at it. Like, it's not going to replace the role you're in. It's just going to make this role you're in so much more efficient and allow you to, spend more time in the other parts that will just make your role even better.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like where does your value or where does your interests lie? And do you want to spend 3 days photoshopping out a background and bringing something else back in to then achieve what you want? Or can you, ask the AI to just replicate what, I've got this image, I want to replace the background with this. The only, blurred area is really about the rights and usage. I personally don't know what the answer is at the moment in that regard. That's a real blurred area, I think, at the moment, that either needs to be well, it seems like a lot of standards and regulations are coming out in regards to the rights of AI images. How that develops, I just don't know at this point, but I'm definitely waiting to see what we can do with it.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how the whole legal side of things goes, as it's a hard debate, because on one hand, adding regulation could completely defeat the whole progression of AI. Because it'd be very hard to regulate where your images are coming from and what percentage of it is being used. And the other hand, not regulating at all, is that having an effect on creatives, and the rights of creators?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you just got to put yourself in that shoe. Where would you want to be the person who's, when you sat there looking at images and suddenly there's an AI generated image that looks just like yours, or there's certain art styles that seem to be copied, so to speak, or please produce an image in the style of so and so. And these people have worked pretty hard to hone their skills and develop their unique style and market themselves in that way. So in that sense, yeah, it does take away, I think a bit of creativity, and I wouldn't necessarily, if it happened to me, feel great about it, that's for sure.
It's definitely a difficult conversation. It'll be interesting to see where it turns. What do you see as the biggest evolutions in design in the coming years, and how can we as designers stay up to date with these evolutions and make sure we continue developing our skills to be relevant in the coming years?
I think I think there's probably two things. One of them is people are becoming a lot more sort of multi-skilled, so not just the tendency to maybe do the product design and the initial mechanical engineering of that, but there's that visualization side of it. There's that understanding of how to interact with suppliers and understanding manufacturing processes. So I think if people are essentially like a bit of a Swiss Army knife, that is going to probably be a little bit more of an expectation. certainly what we try and do here is, we're a very multifunctional team. Whereas like when I graduated, you tend to have, okay, that guy just does CAD, that guy just does
Mm,
sketch Photoshop. So I definitely see there's like a blurred boundary, but the boundaries are starting to blur between those sort of areas of product development. I think the other thing as well, and the expectation from a lot of the client side of it is that understanding of sustainable design practices, but also
mm,
materials, fabrics, and processes. I think that's going to be the biggest advantage is really understanding how to leverage an understanding of that sustainable design as a practice,
mm,
and how it can be implemented early on in the design processes as companies become more and more attuned to that need.
mm. Yeah, definitely. Do you think the sustainable future is a near reality, or do you think it's going to be a long road to get to where we're looking to get?
um I think the interest is definitely there. I mean, personally, I'd like to see it, instilled now
Mm,
as possible. But like, I think it's almost mandatory it is mandatory in my
mm,
eyes for designers to, understand the effects of the products that they're designing, not
mm,
just right now for the client, but later on in life, where at end of
mm,
life, you know, when that product's being disassembled or pulled apart. And I'd like, the turning point for me is basically when I had my daughter, and I thought, well, I need to design, to leave the world in a better place
mm,
than when I came to it for her sake, not for mine.
mm,
I think it's that, that's like we were talking about with the trains, they'll be around for 30 or 40 years, and
mm,
may or may not outlive, where I am at the moment. And it's understanding that long-term impact, and how can we accelerate, how can we pull that back to a point where we are working in a more sustainable way. And I
mm,
think that's why you kind of have to fight your corner for it as well.
mm. Yeah, definitely. Um, what advice would you give to anyone looking to pursue a career in design? Would you recommend that they move into an in-house role like what you're in currently, or would you recommend they pursue manufacturing or consultancy? Like how would you recommend that someone pursue that kind of direction in the future?
I probably wouldn't recommend narrowing yourself too
Mm,
quickly. I think gaining that experience, not just in like a large corporation or a small manufacturer, I think you just don't limit yourself too early on in
mm,
your career. Just try and gain that experience, and if you feel like you have an interest in a certain area, then just
mm,
do it. It's not really, when you come out of university at what, 21, 22, your career is not exactly defined to that point, really, is
mm,
it? And I would suggest just follow what you want to do. If it doesn't work out, then there's always other companies out there that are doing good things.
mm,
I just from my own experience, working in the large companies and consultancies, I've lent towards consultancy work because it's more varied.
mm,
The skills that I picked up and the understanding in a large multinational company was where I felt I developed my most, like critical thinking and
mm,
understanding of, how to engage with people on different levels.
mm.
So there's benefits to all of it.
Yeah. I suppose that's the benefit of being an industrial designer or being in a design field is just it's so broad. You
Yeah.
could be designing a train in one role, and the next role you could be designing furniture, and having that flexibility is what keeps the job so amazing. Mm,
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think that's what keeps us interested as well. Like I said earlier, there's always something to learn from other sectors and
mm,
other areas of design, whether it's medical device design, consumer products,
mm,
aviation, cars. As if you can kind of cross pollinate those skill sets and understanding, then you're gonna put yourself ahead of the competition in terms of finding a job and finding
mm,
something really really enjoy.
mm. Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Sam. And it's been really nice to get your perspective and learn more about your long career across multiple countries. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I'll keep up with the podcasting as well because I'll definitely be listening to the future episodes and keep in touch. If
Yeah,
you're ever, if you're ever down in Sydney, I'll get you to come in and have a look around.
yeah, sounds good.
Yeah,
Thanks, mate.
cool.
Have a good one.
All right, cheers for that.